What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassity. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys that was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. It's the holiday season. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Okay, I am so excited to be having the opportunity to interview my guest here today because I found him through LinkedIn, and we linked up, and I started reading about it. I thought, man, I'd love to have this guy on my show. He's got all the pieces. He checks all the boxes for the nightmare success life that he's lived. And his name's Lester Young. At 19, how does a kid who's 19 years old get a life sentence at 19 and serves 22 years? And how does he become a TEDX speaker, a reentry coach, a best-selling author, a keynote speaker, finding an organization that's called Path to Redemption that really began in prison, and some of those programs still live today that he created. The nonprofit. It's about aftercare assistance for formerly incarcerated people transition back to society. It's also about risk, youth at risk, and he's got a 6-week program that does that. This guy does it all. He's also a champion of the Ban the Box campaign, nationally recognized for that. This guy, Lester Young, is getting it done, and I can't wait to talk to him about his experience, how he made it happen, how he lived through his worst fear. Before we go into that, though, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Autoplaza Direct. You know, who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots, looking for a car? Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. Well, it's kind of like a root canal appointment. There's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Autoplaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you, negotiate your best price, take away all that hassle and whatever that queasiness is going into the dealership. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Autoplaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. All right. Here we are. Lester, welcome in, my man. How are you?
Slide my camera over. I'm great, man. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm so happy that we're doing this interview this time of the year. This is one of those feel-good stories, and it's like I told you, Lester, it's one of those stories that we go into 1,100 prisons with Adovo, and this type of story gets heard in those prisons. A story about hope, redemption, living a life of redemption. It shows that it can be done, but it also takes action. It takes belief and a lot of the things that you did. But take us back a little bit, Lester. What was life like for you growing up as a kid? Because this thing happened for you early on. So take us back into that world.
I would, I always, when I talk about, or first I'll just like say thank you, Britt, for inviting me to be a guest on this podcast, and thanks for your audience for tuning in, and hopefully what I share with you and your audience, it will be transformative. I truly believe in transparency transports people. So this is going to be an honest conversation, authentic, vulnerable conversation about my journey, because I believe by me sharing my journey, it will empower someone else, especially those who are inside of the correctional environment. Hearing this, it would show them that transformation is possible. And for your audience who may be living in their own mental, emotional prison, it would help them be able to do a jailbreak in that. So thank you.
Love that. Because people, as you well know, Lester, so we both do, Yeah, we recognize people getting institutionalized
Mm-hmm.
in prison, um, becoming, that became their, even as much as they hated it, that's the routine, the ugly routine they got used to, and then they got scared of
Mm-hmm.
freedom. But then when you get out, you start looking around you and you see that people have built up prisons in their own mind, whether it's a bad childhood, a bad marriage, a bad job, or whatever it is. They get afraid to take the next step to whatever it is that
Mm-hmm.
they want. And how do you break
Yeah.
free from that? So yeah, that's such a
So
good
just to like
point.
to answer the question as well is like when I look back at my life, when I do the self reflection and I look back at that timeline from born in 1972 to the timeline of 1992. And what happened at 1992 led to an incarceration of a life sentence. But even to step back further, what happened in 1990, 1989, 1988? So for me, self reflection is being able to put my life in that timeline and be able to identify what was the break, what was that pivot, what was that thing that shifted. And is when I
Mm,
go back to that, I go back to 1988, right? March of 1988, March the 2nd of 1988, when my mother, I would say March the 1st, because me and my mother had an argument March the 1st about me washing the dishes. Coming home from school, refusing to wash the dishes as a 16-year-old kid, wanting to go play football with my friends, uh, dropped my book bag in the living room and ran out of the house March the 1st of 1988. March 2nd, I mean, that night, March 1st, me and my mom's had a argument about me not washing the dishes. My dad disciplined me that night, March 1st. March 2nd, I woke up, went to school the next morning, didn't say anything to my mom's, expecting that when I come home, we would be able to sit down and have a talk about my behavior. But I walked out of the house with my mother, assuming that we're going to have a sit down that day after school.
hmm
I walked back in the house maybe 3 hours later, to the news that my mother had died.
Oh man, Lester,
So that I
how old
was
were you there?
16. So
Oh gosh.
walking out of the house the night before an argument, walking out of the house that morning, assuming that you're going to come back to the house and have a talk with your mother, but to walk back into the front door and to receive the news that she died in her sleep. Right. So
Mm,
when you ask that question, what was that time? What happened? At 16, I lost someone very dear to me and never really had an opportunity to process that trauma, that grief, replaying that argument, doing a lot of self blaming. Fast forward, September the 7th, I turned in 1988. I turned 17. About 2 weeks later, I was arrested for possession of crack cocaine. 4 months after my mother' death, 2 weeks after me turning 17 years old, was facing a possibly 25 years of incarceration. Was able to get it reduced down to a 90-day prison sentence as a first-time offender. Did the 90-day military boot camp, and again got released. And 18 months later, I was standing before.
what was your? I'm always interested in that whole 90-day boot camp thing because it's run
Yeah.
differently in all these different states, but there is a such thing. How did you at that age, Lester, go into that boot camp? What were you thinking? Did you think, this is a hassle, but I got to do it? Or were you thinking, no, this is a way for me to kind of
Yeah.
get right and get with myself? Or what goes on when you enter a 90-day
Actually,
boot
like I
camp?
said, like thinking about it from the lens of a 17-year-old kid who's still processing one of the most traumatic thing in his life, and that's the death of his mother. So being
Yeah.
sentenced at 17 years old, I knew the behavior that led to my incarceration was wrong for selling drugs.
hmm
But here it is, I'm 17 years old, sitting in this place still with grief heavy on me. And no
hmm
one never asked a question. Even my father never really understood how grief was impacting, leading to anger, leading to.
Well, I mean, but Lester, it was more than just someone dying. You had an ish a
Yeah,
fight,
absolutely.
words, and that's such a weird.
Yeah.
I know I overly identify with what
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about because I went through a whole thing with my dad. He was my
Mm-hmm.
best friend. We were in business together. And then we went through this trauma together. And he went to prison for 10 years. I went to prison
Mm-hmm.
for 5. When he got out, we were not necessarily seeing
Mm-hmm.
eye to eye. And I thought, I just gotten off probation, and I had thought, you know what, I'm going to go down, and Dad and I are just going to
Mm-hmm.
talk it out. And I called him, and in the words that we had at the time, we weren't, I didn't know if we could ever repair ourselves, but I wanted to try to see if we could understand each other. And I called, and he didn't answer. And I thought, well, he might be busy, whatever it is. And I got a call the next day
Mm-hmm.
that from the halfway house who did a wellness check on his apartment that he was
Mm-hmm.
dead. And it was like one of those things, Lester. And I know that feeling because I thought that I was going to go down the next day and we were going to have this. And I don't know if it would have solved anything, but I knew that that's what was on my mind that I wanted to do. And I know for you that had to have been such an unfinished piece of your life at that age. See, I was older. I was, 50 some odd years old. You were a 16-year-old kid.
It was hard. It was the hardest thing to process, and it took like what I'm going back again to that military boot camp. I went in there with no expectation. I was still processing this and replaying what could I've done differently. So here it is. I'm dealing with grief, and then the fact that now I'm been sentenced to a 90-day military boot camp. And this is another reason why I do the work that I do around empowering young people, because I
Mm-hmm.
realized in my timeline of life, there was a traumatic thing that happened and I did not get over the trauma. The trauma bled.
Right. It was a
Yeah,
pivot
right.
point.
So
Yep.
sat in there for 90 days. You did the boot camp stuff, push-ups, jumping jacks, shining your boots, learning all of the ways to make your bed, etc. It implemented some discipline, but no one in that 90 days never, even during the court process, never looked at that March 1st to September, 4 months, there's something that happened in 4 months. That piece. And I sat there, the
Mm-hmm.
question that was asked, no one even cared about that, is that you violated the law and this is what it is. And I get that part of it. But everyone that is incarcerated, they sometimes their poor choices comes from a place of trauma and hurt. Right. And
Yeah.
this is again why I do the work that I do. Because I always said,
Wouldn't you say most of it, Lester,
yes,
comes that way
yes,
through
yes,
trauma
yes.
and
I'm
hurt?
like, yeah, there's so many stories working with young people in the juvenile facilities. You hearing the same thing. Like young men are losing, like one young man I was working with a couple of days ago, he's a 14-year-old kid dealing with real adult decision making. He lost his father, lost his uncle, lost his brother in less than 2.5 years, and he's 14 now.
Wow.
Could you imagine that? Like, you
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? So
It's an
yeah,
eighth
that's an
grader.
eighth grader who lost his father, which was his best friend. And when he lost his father, he took on his uncle, went to his uncle and embraced him as the father. And later, his uncle died. Then his brother died. So three men that he looked up, that he loved, died. So now he's in school with all of the pain, releasing it through anger and destructive behavior. And so they said, well, we'll send you to the
Mm-hmm.
juvenile environment, which that only makes him harder and criminalize him
Yeah.
even more, instead of saying, hey, we need to put you in intensive therapy, grief counseling, so that you
Right.
don't become that, this doesn't become your lifestyle. So that's the reason what led me to starting Path to Redemption, because I was like, if there was someone inside of that military boot camp would have taken some time to break through that wall of making me, instead of making me do all of these push-ups, but it took time to like try to crack that. God only knows what,
Right. Really try to
yeah,
understand
God
you.
only would know what would have possibly happened. But unfortunately, when I was released 18 months later, I found myself again standing before a judge for murder. And now here it is. Now, how do I process? I'm being sentenced to life. I got sentenced to life. I'm still processing the loss of my mother. Now I'm processing the loss that someone else has, and the pain that I've caused this individual's family, as well as now processing the shame that I brought upon my family. And now I got to sit in this prison environment for 19 years, for the next 20 years of my life, and try to figure out how to navigate all of these different things that is troublesome, right? So it's just been a process, man.
Well, I don't want to paint over what you just said because it's so everything you just said was so powerful. But the standing in front of a judge, being sentenced to life for murder, how, what else was going on in your world around that, your family and everything? Were they um, there for you in this
Yeah.
unbelievable
Yes, I mean, I've been
situation?
always fortunate to have my family, and it was hard for my family to process one that I killed someone. I killed someone over some drugs. I'm selling drugs. A drug deal went bad and someone died. That's like
Mm.
it's my family, having my family there to process this. But as you doing time, now you have to deal with the reality that someone died and they're not waking up ever again.
What does it feel like, Lester? Because I very rarely had the opportunity. I've had Jason Holland and a
Mhm.
couple other people, but what does that feel like? That moment, things have gotten out of hand. Usually, when that kind of stuff happens, and we're
Mhm.
talking about drug deals going bad or whatever, there's a lot of
Mhm.
intensity in the situation, and it happens quickly. How did you deal with that afterwards?
Man, I'm gonna be honest, Brent, that for the first couple of years I was numb from the whole situation. You do your best to escape the pain that you just caused. You do whatever you can.
Mm.
You create a wall, or you create this wall in your mind to block that in, and you put that over there. You
Compartmentalize it.
departmentalize that
Yeah.
because you don't want to, that is too much for you to process considering everything else you're going through. It's time,
Yeah.
it's crazy. So I had to departmentalize that, put that somewhere, unplug it as much as I could to erase it. So what I tell people when you talk about the nightmare, right? What happened? It was when I started reconnecting that wire, that thing called emotions and feeling and
Mhm.
empathy, right? When I started reconnecting that as a human, I began to transform, because my first 3 years of my life sentence in prison, I detached it. I tried my best to erase it, but what I realized is I
Mhm.
was trying to erase it, I was creating more harm emotionally to
Yeah.
myself, mentally, psychologically. I was never at peace. I was never happy. I was always angry. I was struggling to do a life sentence in prison. And then I just realized, like, the only way I'm going to find a sense of freedom inside of the walls of incarceration, I need to reconnect to that. I needed to take ownership for it. I needed to acknowledge it. I knew I need to give it a name, because for the first couple of years, people would say, "What are you in prison for?" I would say, "I'm in prison for killing this guy." Right? Listen, how I would, by me not dehumanizing him, it allowed me to be able
Yeah.
to cope. I didn't want it to mention his name because then it symbolized the person,
Yeah. Personalized it.
family, everything, right?
Yeah.
So once I
Yeah.
started that, I started saying I need to attach the name to this person. I didn't know this person other than drug transaction, but he's still a human being. And when I started
Right.
connecting to that, that's when my transformation. So going back into the nightmare to success, I remember on a Friday night, I was in my prison. At this time, I was reconnecting these emotions and identifying and understanding the harm that I caused. I was watching Dateline in prison, and I heard this mother crying because her son got murdered. And in that,
Mm.
watching that entire 45-minute show, I started thinking more about the victim, right? Started thinking more about what I did. And I remember after the
Mm.
show went off, I said some prayers and I laid in my bed in prison. And then something just woke me up. And I'm like, man, I woke up crying. Like I had a nightmare. I woke up crying. And I remember saying, God, forgive me for the wrong that I've done. Please help me in this journey. And I got back up out of the off of the top bunk in prison, and I went on this cold concrete floor by the door, by the toilet, those small cells.
Mhm.
And I went there
Mhm.
and I just laid my head on this hard concrete floor in a prostrated in a baby fetus position. I started crying, and I just asked God constantly, like, God, forgive me. This is too heavy. And God, I heard this thing saying, like, I have forgiven you, but you have to seek the forgiveness of the person you harm.
Mm.
In that moment, I remember raising back up and looking and saying, how? Like, how do I make this right? And it's just like I got led saying, hey, you need to own it. You need to take ownership. You need to speak to him, his name is Gary Goldinger Jr. Right. So I remember in that moment for 3+ years, I never mentioned his name until that moment on that Friday night about 1 o'clock ish. I on that concrete floor, I mentioned his name for the first time, and I remember saying these words: Gary Goldinger Jr., I apologize. I seek your forgiveness for the harm that I've caused you. I promise you, as long as I have life in my body, I will continue to honor your life in the way that it needs to be honored by doing the right thing. I will use our story to impact the lives of other individuals so that one, that another person don't have to lose their life. Two, that I don't have to be sitting in prison. And that's where the word path of redemption came. It came from that, is that now once I did that, I started getting revelation in a sense of direction that now you're on your own path to redemption. Because in prison, every individual incarcerated is seeking a path to redemption. But inside of a prison, no one shows you how to find redemption. My redemption
How to
came
get
from
there.
my nightmare of laying in that bed and being woken by God or the spirit of this person whom I harm. I began that journey from there.
Lester, that is powerful. Let's take a break there, because I want to, when we come back, I want to talk about how this transformation happened in prison and what you did and how you affected other inmates in prison, because that's such a powerful story. And when you can actually make real change in prison and other people know it, it really is powerful. So I want to recognize Discoverability Company. Do you not like how you show up online? Well, many individuals think there's no hope when it comes to managing your reputation on Google. There is hope. It's called Discoverability Company, and it can help you, whether you're building a reputation from scratch, repairing your search results after a negative news story, or even just trying to position yourself a little bit better against your business or competition. Discoverability can also help how you're portrayed on the popular AI services like ChatGPT. To learn more, visit discoverability.co. They're even launching a do-it-yourself SEO option, a course for individuals who want to make a take on their search results on their own budget and speed. Listeners of Nightmare Success can take $100 off the DIY SEO course with coupon code Nightmare Success. And everybody probably knows this, but the White Collar Support Group or Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group, the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is great space for you. You can join us on Zoom, Mondays, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So, Lester, you get and have this moment, and you feel it, and you this comes out of your mouth, the words that you haven't spoken for a long time, the name of the person that lost his life. But it's different when you're in prison, because you have these routines and people you hang out with, and that becomes your primitive world of how you move in prison. But when something like this happens, you're changing your whole routine. You're changing your whole world. Tell us how does Lester do that in prison?
Hey, that was like the hardest thing. But again, once I made that promise that I will honor your life by doing the right thing, that means that my entire transformation begun. Meaning that I started recentering myself and who I hung out with in prison. What did I start reading in prison? What did I start involving myself in prison? So after that, a couple weeks later, a couple months later, I went into a prison chapel and was speaking to the prison chaplain, and he asked me this question. He said, "Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?" I was like, "Man, I see myself in prison." Like,
in prison.
Like I wasn't, and he says, like, I was like, I see myself in prison. Like, he said, "What do you see yourself doing in the next 5 years? Do you have your education? I was like, no, I was like, I'm not even focused on any education, because I may never get out of prison, because with a life sentence, you have a 3% chance of being free. Why would I need a high school diploma or GED or some type of trade or something like that? I was like, I have no intention of doing none of that. And then he said, "Have you read?" He said, "What are you reading?" I said, I'm trying to like get into books again. I'm in prison, about 23 years old. I'm still reading at maybe a 7th grade level of education, high school dropout, all of that stuff. So he passed me my first book. One of the first books I read was called "As a Man Thinketh, So Is He" by James Allen. And I said, he said, I want you to read this book. And then when you get through with this book, come back and talk to me. Mind you, I got his book. I went back to the cell and I threw the book in there because it was intimidating to sit down and read a book. And in that, he
Yeah.
called me to the office the next week and he's like, hey, did you read this book? And I was like, no, I haven't, And he's like, yo, sit here and spend 30 minutes to an hour, read this book. And I remember.
Oh, so he really took an interest in making sure that you're
Yeah,
going to
and
read
that's
this
the thing
book.
that I always say, that with that night, after that night, it's like the path to redemption. God started giving me the steps to where I needed to be. It was out of all of
Yeah.
the almost 1,000 men in prison, this particular chaplain saw something in me that decided to take some time to
Mm-hmm.
give me a book. And that one book led to him mentoring me. And that one book led
Mm-hmm.
to other books that was related to what life looks like, right? So everything was
Mm-hmm.
ordained and designed by God after, as I said, my life began to transform when I made that promise to my victim. And in
Mm-hmm.
that's where everything began for me. And then and as time went along, I started repositioning myself with my friends. I remember instead of hanging out, I was going to night school inside of the prison, going to get my education. And I remember walking by about 20 of my friends, my homeboys, some of them I grew up with, and some of them, they
Yeah.
were my protection in prison. Because in prison, you got to
Sure.
be protected in different sets that you come
Yeah.
from. So
Yeah.
they were all standing or sitting on a bench inside of the prison yard. And I remember walking by them and it was like, where you going? I said, I'm going to get my education. I'm going to school. And I was like, yo, they were smoking weed and drinking. I was like, man, I don't want nothing to do with that no more. And it was like, listen, they said, if you walk away from us, remember you're on your own. You're on your own, meaning,
It's a lot to think about when you're in
yeah, I
a
was at
maximum
a high
security
level,
prison.
level 3 security,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Protection's a
yeah,
good
protection
thing.
is a good thing and you have to be around that. But I decided in that moment of bravery, I said, I stepped out from it. And I said,
Yeah.
I'm going to do this on my own. And they looked at me.
Takes a lot of courage,
Yeah.
Lester, because, I was not in that
Mhm.
level, but I also know that people, you hang around in your car, your clique,
Mhm.
and when you break away from that,
Yeah.
it takes some, especially in the higher up prisons, the levels when you level
Mhm.
up, because it could be, you could
Yeah,
lose your
you can.
life. It takes a lot of courage
Yeah.
to step out and just say, hey, I am going to be what I want to be, and I step away from
Yeah. I
everything.
did. I felt like I needed to. I needed to, and I was willing to deal whatever the consequences that came with it. And now again, in that nightmare, that level of fear, as it says, your growth is on the outside, on the edge of fear, or whatever your discomfort
Hmm.
is. You have to step in. That was one of those moments where I stepped out of a comfort into an area of discomfort, and it produced a
Yeah.
level of growth for me. Yes, it was
Yeah.
intimidating. Yes, I was afraid going to the showers, going to the mess hall by yourself. I
Yeah.
was afraid, but in that I grew to this is the version I am today is a result of me
Yeah.
choosing to do just that. And over a course of
S-
time, about maybe 6 or 7 months, when they saw that I was serious about it, they started
mhm.
falling in line, right? And that's the thing that some of us don't realize our leadership skill set until we step out of the comfort into a place of discomfort to make a difference. And I found out once I made that, there was so many other of my friends were on their search for their path to redemption. They were dealing with their demons late at night that they didn't have this courage to speak about. But now, because I had the courage to speak about
They
it
saw
and
it.
walk away from it, they saw a different level of peace. They didn't see me seeking comfort and getting high. They didn't see that. They saw me
Yeah.
sitting down, reading books, attending religious services. They saw that level of peace. And they was like, if this man could do it, I know him. I know this guy from the block. I know who he is. And he has a life sentence. And he looked like he has more peace than any of us. And we don't even have a life sentence. I need to get on what he's on. And over a course of time, my friends, other individuals incarcerated with me, they started wanting to learn more about Path to Redemption. So I tell people that Path to Redemption was being taught in prison over 15 years.
It
Yes,
began
it
in
started
prison.
there.
Yeah. It's so cool. And I think the thing that you talk about, the comfort, the
Mhm.
discomfort, you know, a lot of times, when I'm talking to people, because I get a lot of people that are getting ready to go into prison or they're
Mhm.
just coming out. What it is, I think, and we're saying the same thing, is it's the known is the
Mhm.
comfort. That's your known, and the unknown is the
Mhm.
scary thing. The unknown is the scary thing because you don't know. And so your mind can make out things to be so bad. But when you start stepping into that unknown and those become knowns, you get confidence. And I think that's that comfort to the discomfort, or the knowns into the unknown, stepping into it, you gain confidence once you decide you're going to step into that, because you decide that, okay, I'm okay. I'm all right. I'm okay. And then that gains confidence to step more.
The worst thing that you feared is you stepped into it and it wasn't as bad as you thought it was. Right.
Exactly.
So that's why I always tell people that if you want growth, you cannot find growth in comfort. If you're comfortable, you're not growing. Right. And in prison, it's the most uncomfortable environment, but then there's still levels to discomfort. That meaning that you no longer spend your idle time in prison. You don't spend just your time in prison doing idle things. That's a comfort for most people. The discomfort is investing in yourself while you're in prison. Like I go in with no education. I start utilizing my resources to purchase books instead of this. That's a discomfort, because that means that I have to sacrifice going to the mess hall or the cafeteria to eat the food that I don't like. I could spend it on the canteen, but I could also spend it on books. So when I started thinking about transformation and my redemption, I invested money in books, but that was discomforting because now I had to learn how to survive with the bare minimum. But what I was receiving from the books that I read was way more valuable than me eating some type of prison meal that I bought at the prison canteen or the cafeteria. It began to transform the way I started thinking, how I started seeing, how I created a routine in prison. And that routine was not about institutionalizing myself. And how do you institutionalize yourself? When you wake up, you go to the mess hall, you sit down, you play cards, you play checkers, you listen to music, and you find some TV show, and you just binge watch on TV all day until the next count. That's what most people are doing. So my routine started from waking up, praying in the morning, to journaling, to sitting down and reading for an hour, finding a group of men young people who are walking in prison. How do I educate you on how to do time correctly? Because there's a thing that time do you, or you do time. How to time do you is that you just sit there and you just you start counting the calendar.
Yeah, it eats you up.
But how I do time is I structured my day. One of my mentors, who was a business owner, used to come in and do volunteer work in prison. He gave me this, what he called it, the game hack, or just the hack of life. He said, I want you for the next week to sit down and jot down your entire day, from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, and fill in every minute and every second of your day. And then that next Saturday he said, now I'm going to show you how much time you have to maximize your life, even though you're in prison. And I had so many blocks of time wasted. And in that, he was like, you need to be doing this, reading a book, writing a curriculum, writing out your future goals, etc. And I'm still got 8-10 years left on my prison before I even go for parole. And he was giving me this particular life hack to really prepare me and help me level up for my success after incarceration. So Path to Redemption, again, was created to fill in those dead spots, to use my time to the best of my ability to empower others. And the power of that transformation is that when you're empowering others, you become stronger as well, because what you share with others, you get stronger. You master that which you read in a book. You master it because now you're teaching someone else. And that's how I became a teacher in prison. That's why I learned how to speak in prison. Like I tell people, like when they say, hey, you got a TED Talk, I was like, man, I was doing TED Talks in prison for almost 15 years.
And I'll tell you what, those TED Talks, because I've thought about doing that, because I've done speaking, but it's a real, in some places you have 8 minutes, some places you have 12 minutes, but you got to really get your message down and be, tight on what you're saying. And I have so much respect for people that go through that process and actually become a TED speaker, because it's a box checked. If you've done that TED Talk.
Well.
But I got to say, what you just said there, Lester, is powerful on so many different levels. And the other thing that I find that's so inspiring in how you did what you did, you just said something that we just can't gloss over. You had 8, 9, 10 years left of your sentence, not 2 years, not you were getting out in 6 months. Because a lot of guys get freaked out when they start, heading towards the door. 6 months. Yeah. What am I going to do? You were just deciding to just live this way. This wasn't that I'm going to get out in 6 months, so I better get prepared. You just decided I'm going to be Lester and I'm going to live differently, think differently. My mindset's different. And it doesn't matter when I get out. This is just how I'm going to live. I think that's what's incredible on how you
Yeah, that's
transform.
that, and that's the thing about transformation and that nightmare. When you said what nightmare to success is that once you wake up and you want, it's about like they say, how bad do you want it? They said I had a
Right.
3% chance, 97% chance of me spending 40 years in prison,
The rest of your life.
could die in
Yeah.
prison. 3%, you have a possibility. This 3% is to be free. My thing from that is that I'm going to reinvent who I am, and I'm going to create something in prison that you cannot ignore my transformation. Right?
Well, I got to say though, it had to feel really good for you or fill you up to make this transformation, knowing that you were living the way you were, but you had other guys that you were helping and bringing along the way that were believing in you, Lester. They were believing in what you were saying, what you were doing, how you were living. And you start putting these programs in place. And, we talked about at the beginning, a lot of these programs that you put in place lived on long after you were gone, which I find
Yeah. But you know
incredible.
the power though, Brent, man, the power of when a man finds his purpose in life, it
Mm-hmm.
transforms his life and it empowers him. It fills him up with hope, faith,
Mm-hmm.
determination, and resilience. Before
Mm-hmm.
going to prison, I didn't have a purpose. I did not have a purpose. I was aimlessly walking through the world with nothing to do. That's how I was able to get into trouble, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But when I found, going back again to that night, that Friday night in that prison cell, when I had that conversation with my victim, that nightmare, that experience put me on my path to redemption. But in that path to redemption, it helped me to self-discover myself, who I was, but it also gave me a
Mm-hmm.
purpose, something that I was chasing for all of my life. Like people today who have never been to prison, they find their lives still void, a void in their life.
Mm-hmm.
They work hard, they get all of the materialisms.
They're
They're
missing
missing a
something.
purpose, man. When you don't
Mm-hmm.
have a purpose in your life, you will never feel it complete. So in
Right.
prison, even though I had 10 years left on my prison sentence, what gave me a sense of resilience, determination, optimism is that I found a purpose. And the purpose was
Mm-hmm.
me and using who God allowed me to be able to empower someone else. So it was not about when am I going to get out of prison? It was not about that. It was like I was becoming now the servant leader, right? A servant
Mm-hmm.
leader empowering other people using my experience saying, hey, this is what I would do if I had 5 years left. Even though I don't have a parole a max out date, but this is what I would do. So let me vicariously live through you by giving you some things that can possibly transform your life. And I go back to the
Mm-hmm.
story. I go back to the story in the Bible of the story of Joseph, how Joseph was in prison. He discovered his gift, how he had the ability to interpret dreams, etc. And when the king had this troublesome dream one day, they say, hey, who is it in our kingdom that can help solve this and answer this problem? And the guy who was locked up with Joseph said, hey, I know this guy in prison who interpret my dreams. So I always looked at it in this.
Isn't it funny that the Bible is a book about
Yeah,
prison?
yeah, yeah, it absolutely is.
I mean, if you really break it down, all the leaders in the Bible have
Yeah.
transformed from prison into
Joseph,
some way or the other.
the story of Joseph was my blueprint. It gave me, say, hey,
Yeah,
Lester, the world is going to face some troublesome times with young people. Create
right.
something that one day they're going to come searching, and you don't want to have disciplinary problems. You don't want to have a bad institutional
Yeah.
record. You want to have something that out of the 1,000 men in here, how many of them have created a program that is empowering people? It never came, the governor never came to release me,
Yeah.
but the parole board saw it in 2014.
Well, I want to talk about that because, you know, you just didn't do 4 or 5 years. You're in 22 years. Um, when this all comes about, the parole board, um, the opportunity, what's going through your mind? Are you thinking that there's a chance that this could happen? I mean, walk us through that, Lester, because those are things that like I can see you build
Yeah.
yourself up. You know, I've had people on that, you know, that got turned down 2 or 3 times and then they finally did get released. But how do you
The
walk through
first,
that?
when my first parole hearing was 2012. From
Mhm.
just statistics, looking at the data, most people who going up for their first time on a 20-year life sentence don't make parole their first time. So it was like
Mhm.
I just need. It's almost like in a boxing match. You just need to get punched first. You
Get
just
some
need to get
experience.
like hit somebody to hit you in the stomach. You get
Uh-huh.
that feeling. Now it's like, okay, we can fight. So it was almost
Uh-huh.
like that for me. 2012 was me. I needed to get punched. I needed to see how it was set up. I needed to know how the
Mhm.
questions that they asked, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So it gave me, after I got denied in 2012, now I went to work in a training, like training myself for 2014. I had 2 years to now
Mhm.
condition myself as a speaker, whatever I needed to do. And I remember this,
Yeah.
Brent, my mentor, he would always tell me as it led up to my parole hearing, he said, practice speaking with your eyes closed, hearing the voices of every one of the parole board members. And he would just fire shots, questions to me about my transformation in prison. The day I
Mm.
went up for parole, this is powerful, Brent. The day I went up for parole, that morning I went up for parole, the parole examiner said, hey, Lester, we having technical difficulties. You're not able to see the parole board members, but they can see you. Remind you that
Wow.
I've been practicing with my eyes closed where I couldn't see them. I could hear them.
Yeah.
So she said, if you want, we could maybe put you off for later in the evening, or maybe have to reschedule it. I said, I'm going in right now. Right. And most people's like, man, I can't talk with I
You'd
I
practiced it.
practice it, Brent. That's the power of the vision, the power of vision and
Yeah.
preparation. So I sat there
Yeah.
and I remember me going through this process, hearing them and saying, oh yeah, let me answer this. And I remember after I got through, I told my father who was there with me, I said, Dad, I said, it's over with. He's like, what do you mean? I said, it's over with, Dad. I said, I am confident that I will be walking out of prison in a short period. And about maybe 2 minutes after I spoke and I shared, I walked out and I
Yeah.
sat down, and this lady walked up to me and she said, Lester Young, you made parole. It was like
Oh,
the
man.
most, it's almost like you finally
Can you
had an
imagine?
opportunity to excel, right? Like, but just to go back
Yeah.
to show you like the power of the vision, you have to be able to see it.
Gotta see
You
it.
have to see yourself doing that thing that you desire to do. No matter how dark your days are, you have to see it. No matter what, in every day in prison, I learned to put one foot in front of me every day, even though the tunnel was dark. For 22
Mhm.
years, it was dark. I never gave up.
Well, what was your thought knowing that you've been in for 22 years that you're going to be stepping out into the real world society? What goes through a guy's mind after
Go back
22
again, but I was
years?
prepared. I prepared for that. I prepared for 22 years of release. The only thing I wasn't prepared for is the culture shock and other things that came
Yeah.
into play. I was prepared. I walked out of prison already the man that I already envisioned the life that I was going to have when I walked out of prison. So it wasn't scary for me.
Mhm.
What makes it scary is when individuals have spent 10 years in prison, idle time, playing games, BSing around, and then their last 6 days,
Mhm.
60 days, or 6 months of release. Now they try to cram in everything, and you can't
Right.
transform in 6 months what you have done to yourself in 9 years. So for me, when I
Yeah.
walked out of prison, it was I already was prepared. I was teaching, I was living, I was breathing it. I walked out with the
Mhm.
determination. These are the things I'm going to do when I got out of prison. Of course, I ran across a couple roadblocks, and the roadblocks where I didn't factor in the collateral consequences tied to your felony conviction after you get out. And that means like employment, housing, discrimination.
Mhm.
I wasn't aware of those things. I also wasn't aware of how institutionalized I was when it came down to the way I lived, the way I moved. Like going into a store was like I had an aggressive posture in prison. Even though the things I did, you still had to protect yourself. So finding that my posture was different, I didn't smile as much, right? I remember taking a picture, this lady who was going to hire me to do some janitorial work. She said, hey, could you send a picture of me, of yourself, to me so that I know who you are when you walk into our office building? I took this picture of her. I
Mhm.
was maybe out of prison maybe 2 weeks, And I took this picture of myself with the worst grin. I mean, I didn't smile. It was just a prison mug picture. And I just got off the phone telling this lady about I was in prison for 22 years for murder. And I sent her a picture that was a normal picture to me in prison, but it was a picture of fear and intimidation. And that's when I realized how the culture of prison I needed to flush out. I needed to learn how to smile again when I got out of prison, Brent. I needed to learn how.
You smile a lot.
I tell people I've learned how to smile now because
Yeah.
I'm free. I am free of the incarceration, institutionalized behavior. I'm a free man, so I can smile, but I had to learn how to smile after prison. And many people don't understand that. But in prison,
no, I mean, listening to you and I've so enjoyed this whole conversation because you're inspiring. Your personality is infectious. So, I mean, I can't even imagine a Lester Young that doesn't smile because as you speak, you smile. So, you know, that's why I think you're probably a great speaker and you're able to converse with people and get them, you know, draw them in. But so you get past that. And you kind of have to shake it off of you. I mean, literally shake it off of you. But you start doing a lot of things. You know, when did you feel like you were catching that momentum of being out, getting used to it, learning how to smile, but also doing all these big things?
It took me some time, but you know, again, I came home with a plan. My first month out of prison, I remember knocking on the door at the juvenile facility where I was staying. I knocked on the door, said, "Hey, my name is Lester Young. I just did 22 years and 5 months, and I want to save your youth from incarceration." I remember that was my selling point. Yeah,
that's big. Yeah, that's a big statement.
From incarceration to this juvenile facility, and she was like, "You did how many years in prison?" And I said, "I've been home now 1 month, and I want to save your youth." And she was like, "Whoa." Let me go and get someone that you speak to. And I spoke to this guy and he gave me an opportunity to speak. But then he was like, hey, he said, this is a very delicate situation working with young people. He said, you need to give yourself some more time because they said, we have seen individuals come home from prison enthusiastic to want to do some difference in the community. And they find themselves back in prison within 6 months. He said, give yourself some time to create something. I said, I'm fine. I said, I will go build something and I'll be back, you know, and that's exactly what I did. I started doing what I intended.
I'll show you.
I was like, I'm going to show you, but I'm not that average Joe guy got out of prison. I'm the guy that has planned.
Right. I've been preparing for this for 10 years.
Ready, you know what I mean? And eventually I was able to build Path of Redemption up to a point now where I'm currently running a youth program inside of this juvenile facility in South Carolina.
Let's talk about that, Lester, because I think what you're doing is so cool. Because the pieces that you teach is the power of choices, strengthening the self-esteem and self-respect. Those three things, and it's a 6-week course. You know, like how many? Like first of all, like how many kids are a part of this thing? What's going on there?
Kids that went through our program, and every day we go inside. I have a team of people who are formerly incarcerated, go inside a juvenile facility from 7 days a week, from 9 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night. And we're showing them how we use our lived experience to empower our young people. So in that power, the power of choices is what I tell people is that was that decision making for me. The power of choices, I made a bad choice. We all have a choice in life, positive, negative, and how that one bad choice could affect your life. So I teach a curriculum called the 30-second rule. The 30-second rule for me, my crime took 30 seconds, which cost me 22 years. You know what I mean? And most people who are in prison, they made that 30-second, that 60-second decision that cost them a certain amount of time. So I show them now the most precious commodity that you have on earth is time. And how you utilize that time determines your level of success or your level of failure. My 30 seconds was 30 seconds was used bad, which was a downfall for me, 22 years of my incarceration. So that's really what I teach now is everything I teach from like my book, The 5 Stages of Incarceration. This is the book I taught for 15 years in prison. I have now converted this book into a 16.
You got a whole series.
The 5 stages of growth, the 5 keys to success after incarceration. But like I convert these into.
And by the way, while we're talking about that, Lester, you can go to Path to Redemption and it'll lead you to all your books on your site. And I encourage people to go to Path to Redemption because it's got a lot of really cool things on there. It's a nonprofit, so you can give on there.
Thank you.
So check that out. It's a great website doing great things. But
Yeah,
anyway, I didn't
I
mean
find it, that's fine,
to
but that's
jump
what
in.
I do is using these particular things to impact our young people. Because going back again to what I said earlier, is that I wish that there was someone like me, who I am now, a 52-year-old man with the
Yeah.
lived experience. I wish I had a version of me speaking to my younger self today that could possibly help transform my life. So that's why I show up inside of these facilities every day, using my story, and then also the people on my team, helping them to use their story to empower our young people to transform their lives. So again, that a young person don't have to spend 22 years in prison for a 30-second decision making.
And then tell us what, I mean, I know all the, I know what it is. I'm going to ask you though, but the aftercare for people getting out, what all do they
With
get?
those who are transformational, for those who are returning home from prison, I'm a transformational coach, reentry coach, where I help individuals navigate that emotion and set realistic goals for themselves after incarceration. That's why I wrote the book called The 5 Keys to Reentry. And it's about self-care after incarceration. Most people, when they walk out of prison, they don't realize how prison have affected them emotionally and mentally. And you ask the average person, "Are you okay in prison?" They be like, "Yo, I'm fine." And I have the
Yeah.
analogy that you cannot walk in the rain and don't get wet. Every day in prison, you got,
That's a great analogy for prison
yeah,
and getting
you
out.
got wet in prison. You just don't know how wet you have gotten
Mm-hmm.
yet, because you have normalized
Mm-hmm.
your wetness in prison. But when you get out of here and you're walking around people who have not been walking in the rain, that's when you realize that, man, I'm emotionally damaged. I'm emotionally wounded here. I'm not able to connect with people emotionally. For example, you think about, if you have to do 20 years in prison, you know that you can't love. You If you have a significant other, wife, children, you love them, but you can't love them fully, because you know that eventually they may not come to see you and visit no more. If you in love with, you got
Yeah.
married before prison, I had a girlfriend, man, you know, if I got 20 years, this woman is not going to stick around, right? I may not see my children
Right.
depending upon where I'm at. So what you learn to do in prison to survive is you start disconnecting your emotions. You have love for your family, but you don't allow it to get to a point where it causes you to be weak in prison. So you disconnect just to survive. And then you think that it's going to be easy, like I can just pop some batteries in, or just like you plug up your iPhone, I plug it up and within 20 seconds I see it says I got power. That's not the case with human beings walking out of prison. You have disconnected for 20 years, and now you in a relationship. You look for the man who's in a relationship with a woman, and you realizing this woman says, "Man, you're not emotionally available to me." And the reason why you're not
Yeah.
emotionally available is because for 20 years you have not been emotionally available. You're not even in tune.
What? Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit, Lester, because you grew
Yeah,
up in prison. I mean, 19-year-old kid, and you got out and you're 40 or
41.
41. And wh- personally, where, how, how does that all fit? Like getting out and meeting a
Mhm.
significant other and being 40 years old, because you were doing all these
Yeah.
things on a level of helping people, but how was it for you
Yeah.
personally with getting plugged back into, hey, I'm Lester Young and I want to
Yeah.
be kind of like live the next, my 40s and 50s in a way that
The
I
trauma
hope.
shows up. The trauma shows up. It shows up the areas where you were not aware of your blind spots. It's hard to learn how to love
Hmm.
when you can't love in prison. That's something you can't
Hmm.
teach. You learn how to love your partners, your friends, your friends in prison, but you don't learn how to love a
Hmm.
woman correctly in prison, because that's you don't have
Hmm.
that opportunity. You have a feeling, but you don't know how. For me, I didn't know how to love a woman as an adult. I only had the love of a
Right.
teenager. So for me, that was a
Sure.
whole different. I'm still learning how to love in the most authentic and most purest way with a woman, as now a 52-year-old man. So I made mistakes emotionally. I was emotionally disconnected, and through counseling, through mentorship, it allowed me to help me to be able to say, "Oh, this is the problem. You need to put this wire here, because you're no longer in prison no more. You can now allow that thing to flow through you a little differently, right?" You don't realize that. So I had to learn that.
It's got to be, I mean, yeah, it's got to
Yeah.
be a lot. And the other thing that I find encouraging, inspiring about your story is that your good work didn't go
Mhm.
unnoticed. It was in September of 2020 that you received a full pardon from the state of
Mhm.
South Carolina.
Yeah.
It's a pretty
It's
big
been a
deal.
blessing. It's been a blessing.
I mean, that's a pretty
Yeah.
big deal,
Because I
Lester.
was like on a lifetime parole, meaning that, once I got out of prison, I was still on parole. I was going to die on parole, still tied to the system. I wasn't able to travel, wasn't able to do anything. Now I was not even able to vote or nothing. So it was a blessing once
Yeah.
I received that pardon in 2020. Again, that was another pivot for my life. I was able to now visit countries that I dreamed about visiting in prison. I'm able to vote. I'm able to participate in the process of being a citizen now. I'm able to buy
Mhm.
a home or whatever, anything those collateral consequences prohibited me to doing, now I could do because I no longer have that felony conviction on my record that has a pardon, which now give me a lot of my civil duties back or rights back.
Big deal. Big deal. I'm just fascinated by your story, and I so get why you've been able to do what you've done. Your personality draws people to want to hear what you're saying, and I just hope you do more. I wish we could clone you, Lester. I wish we could just clone and put Lesters in every state. What do you think, going through everything that you've gone through, because you have gone through a journey, man? What do you think's your biggest takeaway from all of this?
The human spirit is so powerful, is that we underestimate the power of our human spirit and faith in God. We underestimate that power. When you really understand the power of faith in the human spirit, God is created in a way of resilience beyond your belief. The thing that you would assume that will break you is the same thing that will make you. Right? Like that thing
Mm,
that,
that's
yeah, like
powerful.
the thing that when you went to prison, I went to prison,
Mm,
we was afraid of that thing that was gonna break us.
yeah.
But look who you discovered in that. So it's almost like the diamond within, right? That a diamond is
Mm-hmm.
built over a period of years of pressure, and people would
Pressure.
spend millions of dollars for the diamond, right? But all of us are diamonds, and the pressure of incarceration produced the best version of who we are as human beings. You see your resilience, your whole mindset, your mindset have shifted as a result of the pressure of incarceration. So that's what I've learned, man, is that things don't come into your life to break you. It only comes into your life to make you better. But it's about, again, how you respond to it. Most people, they crumble because they understand this
Mm-hmm.
is something that is life changing. Yes, it is, but it's going to make you. All you have to do is just have faith and continue to wake up every day with a level of gratitude, and you begin to see the shift in your life, and you'll realize that that thing that was intended to break you or kill you made you the person that you are today.
I knew you'd have a good takeaway, Lester. I could have bet on
Yeah.
that one. I want to make sure everybody can get directed to where you are. It's path 2. It's the numeral 2, redemption.org. You can find out everything you want to know about Lester and what he's doing there. You can also find his books and his series of books. You can also go to Amazon and get that too. And if you're looking for my book out there, go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble, Nightmare Success. And I also, speaking of gratitude, I want to thank Homestead Financial, Home Mortgage. They let me use all this fancy equipment in here, which I so appreciate. And if you've got home mortgage needs, Greg Aftiev is your guy. He knows it all. I know it's kind of a hassle, but if you guys got time, it really helps the show if you go leave a review on Apple. If you want to know about me, what I've got going on is BrentCassity.com. I spell it wrong. I spell it with a TY, not a DY. And as I used to say to my folks when I was writing my emails back from Leavenworth, stay strong, I'll do the same. Lester Young, man, I got inspired today by, I know the listeners are going to be. I wish you the best, and thanks for taking the time to come on today. I so appreciate
you, man,
it.
and you and your family enjoy the holidays. Be safe, man, and continue to use your gift that God has given you to make an impact in the world by creating these podcasts and creating this platform for other individuals to share their nightmares to success. So thank you for this invite.
Right back at you, Lester. Thank you so much. Nightmare Success, in and out.